As you noticed, up till now, we stayed fairly close to journalism as we know it, but there is much more. I'm joined now by Angelique Spaninks. Welcome.
Hello.
Angelique is director of MU, hybrid art house in the Dutch city of Eindhoven, and she has a background in both art and journalism.
Yes.
Angelique, does it surprise you that Harald Dunnink, as a designer, got involved in journalism?
No, not at all.
Not
really?
at all?
No. I think design has evolved many years ago already beyond the product and the material design, adding new fields like information design, like social design, more conceptual ideas of how to shape our world and our information society, and also do a lot of research. And I think that's one of the common grounds where journalism and design meet, is in the research field. And that is very much also my interest in how design is working.
Is it solely the research, or could you say that are there other things you can think about why design is important to innovate journalism, and vice versa? What could designers
Yeah, it goes
learn
both
from?
ways, I think. I think journalism is evolving very strongly too, but within its own maybe limitations or its own formats. The way technology is evolving and how to use these information technologies, I think media are using that in a certain way that fits the way media work. Mm-hmm. And I think design has the much more liberty to take the same type of technologies and experiment a lot more with it, use it in a different way, not focus on the now, but add loads and loads of questions to something specific, which can be a news fact, but it can also be a human story or a line of thought or a different take on history or the future. And design has all this liberty and all this possibility to also add imagination, to also add design strategies, design ways of thinking, taking things apart and reconstructing it, that I don't think are easy to implement in common journalism. So I think design can be a bit of the testing ground and the playing field, but also the critical side to how media are working, questioning that also. And I think a lot of designers are taking up that possibility.
You created a show called the New Newsroom 3 years ago. What was that about?
That was very much about the idea that we are so submerged in numerous ways to generate and share information and stories and news. We live in this information society, and how do we deal with that? And it's literally at our fingertips. We can do it all with our little machine that's everywhere. Mm-hmm. And how can we how can we use this power of digital technology and big data and artificial intelligence and social media and create new and interesting and different, maybe also like civic journalism, as everybody can do it? That doesn't mean we are all journalists, but we potentially could be. Mm-hmm. And I think that Bellingcat is proving that, and forensic journalism is proving that architects can be great fact-checkers and researchers. So I think all these different players in this field of the information society are adding to bring it further, to innovate collectively.
Okay, we come back to this. I suggest we start to watch first a pre-recorded interview, because this person that you're going to see, she is a pioneer in the kind of work that Angelique is talking about. Her name is Mazria Katz, and she's based in New York as a journalist and a writer, and she was director at Eyebeam Center for the Future of Journalism, supporting artists to produce innovative journalistic work. Marisa is in New York. I would love to be there too, but Corona, as we said. So there is a pre-recorded interview in which she shows an example of a project that she was proud of and involved with that was prize-winning. And I started to ask her what she's working on right now.
Well, I'm back to reporting almost full time, actually. So I just wrapped a piece for the New York Times a couple weeks ago. I'm working on a few more right now, basically still focusing on the same beat that I've been focusing on for years, which is sort of that place where culture and politics kind of meet, which is basically everything these days. So it's not really, as abstract as it used to be, I guess, maybe when I started.
And now in the work you're doing and the work you have been doing, you seem to be specifically keen on the let's say, the cutting edge of art and journalism. And why is that?
I really feel that art can explore abstract truths, and when it's paired with rigorous journalism, I think readers are able to understand a story in a way that's closer to how they experience the world itself. And that's very important because I think the way that news has been produced and is being experienced has in some way it's been kind of convulsing a little bit. It's kind of going through a very it's reinventing itself, but yet I do feel that art has a way of upending the way we typically see issues that affect our daily lives that is needed in journalism.
Can you give me an example?
Right. So one of the pieces that just was debuted on the Eyebeam Center for the Future of Journalism, which basically means, when I say debuted, it means it was supported by the center, was a piece that worked with an artist named Matt Hein and a journalist named Ben Mock for the New Yorker. And this was like the most ambitious, let's say, innovative sort of online experiential piece that the New Yorker has ever done. Essentially, what it is that Ben Mock is this unbelievable journalist who spent time reporting on people who have or were interned in the camps in Xinjiang. And what he basically did, and the piece was called sort of Inside Xinjiang's Prison State. The piece was accompanied by an immersive virtual reality documentary called Re-Educated, which also premiered at South by Southwest and has went on to win quite a number of awards, actually. And basically what it does is the article in the film examines the secret world of re-education camps in Xinjiang in the region of China. And it's a site that's believed to have sort of the largest mass internment of ethnic and religious minorities since World War II. And in 2018, a year after the camps began to sort of crop up in the region, it was reported that as many as 1 million Chinese people, predominantly Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities, were held in captivity. And so for this article, basically, the artist, Matt, worked with Ben to tell the stories of 3 men that were imprisoned in a camp in the city of Tachang.
If you stand in the center of the room, facing the door, you see a small, eye-shaped camera.
Behind you is another camera. Then here is a toilet. The beds were bunk beds. Here's a bed where I slept. I slept on the upper bunk.
If you look out the window, You can see the huge fence of the camp and a grassy area.
What's so fascinating about this is that nobody's actually able to go inside these camps, right? This is kind of one of those examples of it's ambiguous. It's kind of, we don't really know exactly. Maybe there are a couple images online, but the story itself is sort of still relatively obscured from the public. And so what this story did and what Matt's work did in particular was like, it illustrated a very complex story that otherwise, you might read and you might not quite understand, or it might not like, if you were to just read it, you might not really like understand the sort of the depth to which this program is being sort of enacted in China,
And
right?
now, as a user, you become part of it. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Almost as if you are there.
Exactly
Right.
what I'm
Right.
saying. Yeah.
When you think of a project like this, what does it show to traditional media? What can they learn from it?
It shows to me, right, is that the potential impact that art can have on the world of journalism, right? That like the two can work in a way that supports the other, and they aren't, in the way that traditionally you see art as a kind of illustrative afterthought, right, with stories. But here it actually worked to tell the story. And I think that with so many complex stories that are being told these days, I think it does help. I think it helps just sort of um, make the complicated more clear. And I think that's what this shows. And I think it shows it very, very effectively. And I think it demonstrates how it can be used again and again, this kind of method, this collaborative method.
Where do you think this crossover approach is leading?
Well, I don't want to get too deep into this boring subject, but the economics of it is where this could potentially prevent it from being more mainstream. It's not inexpensive to produce these kinds of revelatory journalistic pieces.
Right.
If I had it my way, I would say, can everybody just slow down and maybe not produce as much, but a little bit more concentrated and a little bit more ambitious? But, the internet doesn't really survive or function in that way. And so we're in it's a bit of a conundrum, right? But I think there are great examples of where this can go and the impact it can have. But the important thing at the moment is like trying to figure out a way to reconfigure the economies or the sort of budgets of, publications so that they enable more ambitious, rigorous storytelling that does take more time, right? And time, we're often journalists, editors, publishers are time poor. How do we change that? I don't know. That's something I'm very interested in pursuing. And that's the thing that I really think about a lot with all of these projects of mine.
Marisa Katz from New York. Angelique, is this examples that she showed, is that what we have to think about when we talk about designalism, merging design and journalism?
Yes, certainly. It's I think, a good example. It underlines the visual culture that we're in. They are taking you inside a world where you yourself never can be in or never want to be in. Maybe that is also a problematic thing a little bit, because as Western news consumers, we are getting our peek into these camps that are also part due to how we treat the world. I mean, it's that's a problematic side to it. But I do think it's important
but
to
that's
have
in
that.
the story. That's not.
Yeah, that's in the story. Yeah, but that's also by illustrating it. It's also like having a VR and going into a Syrian camp. And then walking around in a camp like that. Is that where we want to go? Is that what news is?
Is that morally acceptable?
Yes, that's another debate maybe, but that's also what is happening, of course, with these new technologies that you can use in very different ways. I think it's something to address, and I'm sure critical designers will take that question into account when they do these sorts of things. The fun thing is that Eyebeam is when I started making exhibitions, the first place I wanted to go to was Eyebeam, because it was at the forefront of digital experimentation. Artists were in residency there, making great work that also had this difficulty and this time-consuming, but also high need of hardware that was still very expensive. Nowadays, it's a lot less expensive, but the time is still a thing in creating these kinds of stories. So the time poorness of the journalist is also the time poorness of the designer and the artist. But probably some of the answer in overcoming that is in what she also suggests is maybe not try and add more and more and more news and more detailed information and doing every little fact, but to make better and more complex and layered stories that will grab the essence of what is happening and the important processes.
Right.
Yeah.
But I was also surprised by this project that she showed, that it was in collaboration with The New Yorker, which is like a fantastic but very traditional, classic news medium, and that they were willing to...
But this is an essay in visual. This is also storytelling in almost a film way.
Right.
It's also almost a classic way of doing or of illustrating, because it is still a little bit illustrative to a news story.
Yeah. Now we're talking about making these stories, but there is also the audience. Do you think that people are ready for new forms of journalism?
I think they are, and more and more. I mean, people have to learn to appreciate that. And I think younger generations learn very fast. I think the digital born, I'm not digital born, but I can barely keep up. But there's a lot happening in how you consume these stories and how you read them and how you understand them. And I think it's interesting to see that in a lot of art academies, there are now courses and plans like non-linear narratives. It's a master here in The Hague. I think that's wonderful, because we need non-linear narratives to be made by artists, to be maybe also experimented with in traditional news media.
Can you explain for people who don't know what it is? What is non-linear?
Well, a storyline usually goes from A to B to C to D. It's like a film. It's like understanding how something comes about. Non-linear would mean you have this part and this part, more like a collage. And it's changing the way you take the information to yourself. It probably also appeals to the way you link things within your head. So you have to be able to read that, to understand that. But we do that more and more. In film, it's also used more and more to jump from time zones, to have different characters, to experiment with places where you are or ways of filming, and making it a complex story so you don't really know where you are, but you know there's something happening. And there's these other things that you can use in conveying reality, because reality is much more complex than we usually give it.
Right.
We try to see it one-dimensional or two-dimensional at the most. And it's maybe 4 or 5 or 5,000 dimensions.
I will show some examples of how complex reality can be. That is, you chose 3 examples of what you think are outstanding projects. And the first one is by a Dutch artist called Coralie Vogelaar. Who is she, and what was her project about?
Coralie is an Amsterdam-based artist who mainly works in the digital realm, technology, and she focuses a lot on the interaction between the machine, the software we use, the biases that are in there, the algorithmics that we trust and that we take for granted in a way and see as neutral, which they are not. And she kind of explores and experiments with that, and she takes it apart. She uses a lot of science. And
we have a still here, actually.
Yes. This is a very interesting project. This is, we've shown this at MU. It's called Recognized, Not Recognized. And for this, she has taken databases of photo press agencies. She scraped them for the 10 biggest news events between 2010 and 2015, I think. Mm-hmm. And she gathered about 850,000 pictures of these 10 events, made from all kinds of different angles, made by professional photojournalists, but also by citizen journalists or passers-by with a phone. And she combined them and ran through them and analyzed them on how people were acting in these. And her question was, what features determine a successful news photograph? And the successfulness she took from how much they were indexed on Google. So the one with the highest rates were taken a lot by newspapers and by people watching it, thinking that that was the best news picture of that event.
She kind of found the type of news picture?
Well, she never says, I found it.
Because,
but she was
rating it.
Yeah, she was looking at these different features and analyzing them. And then the interesting part is you could line them out and you could picture them. But then she asked a choreographer, a befriended choreographer, to play them out, to choreograph these different settings. So she selected like 20 or 30. And she selected the chosen ones, so the good ones, and the not so good ones, or the ones that didn't make it.
And they are in the same video.
And they were placed next to each other, and the dancers were doing these postures.
Taking these poses.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a video clip, I think. Let's just go to the next one, the next project you chose, because it's different.
Very different.
It's by Alice Wong, and it's a project called Us versus Them. Mm-hmm. Can you please introduce it?
Alice Wong is also a designer who graduated from the Design Academy. She calls herself a storyteller. In film, and she makes a lot of mix-ups and collages. She uses a lot of humor and a lot of references from pop culture or ordinary media, and by recomposing them and mixing them up, a different kind of story appears, and it's very engaging.
What is this one about?
This one is called Us and Them, and it's it gives a voice to the an Asian American people in the States, of course, how they came as working there, and how they were viewed, and also from the beginning they were put aside from, and they came to work, but very quickly there was this really heavy othering going on, putting them in their own. These Chinatowns are not because the Chinese really wanted to be together, but they were they were trying to get a safe place together, so they had to stay together just to keep to be safe.
Okay.
And in pop culture, you have all kinds of references, and she uses a lot of pop culture for it.
Okay.
So when I have kids, they're going to be really weird looking, because they're going to be half Asian and half regular. And people are always like, you don't like Asian guys? I'm like, no, I like regular people.
What does this actually mean? When Chinese immigrants first showed up in the U.S. in the 1800s,
they moved into the old homes that white people had abandoned for greener pastures.
The basic desire was to make a living.
And making a living was easier said than done.
Chop, chop! Get these goodies back in here!
What?
The backlash against Chinese was not motivated by a sense that they were inferior. It was the sense that they were superior, that they would do better than white, many of whom themselves also were foreigners.
Everybody knows that illegal to kill China. To hell with that damn China.
white America saw them as heathens who stole their jobs and raped their women.
The term was called Yellow Peril, where Asian men were seen as primitive, dangerous madmen.
Everything from political cartoons, obviously government policy, was all about kind of framing Asians as almost bestial vermin.
The xenophobia and discrimination escalated, leading Congress to pass the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which completely banned Chinese immigration to the U.S.
The Chinese Exclusion Act contributed to the creation of Chinatowns across the U.S., places where Chinese immigrants could feel safe.
The law wasn't overturned until 1943, when the United States needed China's cooperation fighting Japan in World War II.
It's clear what you said about pop culture.
Yes, very much. And I think it's wonderful how she uses these images that we all know and puts them together in a different way, tells this a very profound story with it, and a very painful story also. But it's going on again. It's happening now again. Because of Corona probably, and the way Trump has framed it to be the Chinese disease. Yeah. You get this all and over again, and you look differently at a kung fu film, and you look differently at a Chinese in a comic being depicted in a very typical way.
Right.
And I think that's important.
Okay. Let's move to your third choice. Yeah. It's a project by Cream on Chrome. Shall we first see it?
Yes,
or do you want to introduce? No, maybe you introduce what it is. Or
well, Cream on Chrome is a duo also. I know them from Eindhoven. They are very much interested in taking up very prominent societal changes and transformations, and making them into experiential installations that turn your view on issues around, but also open up a discussion.
Based on the research we did for 4D News, we created a newsroom with 2 interactive interfaces.
Visitors use a green arrow to browse the timeline of a news story. The aim is to add context by looking at the recent past to understand how we arrive at the present.
One story displays the changing perception of the city of Aleppo over the course of the Syrian conflict, as reported from Dutch news media.
The Syrian army stepped up its attacks on Aleppo and Homs yesterday.
Seeing these different times, like slices of subjective truths next to each other, users can debunk inconsistent coverage and question how Western news media is framing events.
There is still the smell of Arabian poetry.
On the other side of the room is an updating article, where visitors can pull a physical scroll bar up and down, browsing the timeline with changing headlines, images and tones of voice. The story analyzes how Angela Merkel's phrase, "Wir schaffen das, we can do this," was radically reinterpreted by the media from 2015 to 18.
4D News is an experimentation into news formats, as well as a research method that explores the development of entire news stories.
Our project aims to turn news consumers into news explorers by revealing how the journalistic framing around media spectacles continues to change over time.
At the end of this short film, the male voice says something that I found interesting. They talk about moving from news consumers to news explorers. So it's a kind of meta story about journalism. Is that the importance of the kind of work they do?
Sort of, yeah. It's opening up the debate, but also giving agency to the person watching or to who's consuming, to explore for themselves, to make their own stories, to make their own linkages within time. And I think that's something, when I chose these projects all three separately, because I like them a lot. And then one of the things also what Marisa was saying about time poorness, time consuming, they all have to do with time. So this is about telling a story not as it happens, which journalism often is. It takes the full length of a period and analyzing that, making it more like a circular story about it. Aleppo was alive and it was a city that was bustling, and then the war came and now it's all broken. And to see that happening in time, and to be able to see that happening gives another layer and more deeper meaning to it. And you can start thinking about, what do I think of that, in a way?
This ties in with a viewer's question by a viewer, or rather more a statement saying, okay, designers used to illustrate journalistic work. And what we're talking about actually is designers being journalists and journalists being designers more.
Well, it's a co-creation. I think each can bring expertise and knowledge and practice to the table, and together they create something new. And I think that's what is happening and what should happen, and what can also overcome this time-consumedness, because you need time to do a good story that has temporality, that has depth, that has knowledge. But if you do it with 5 or 10 people, or if you do it with, like old media were expensive too.
Right.
I mean, it's not cheap to make a television documentary. It's not cheap to make a newspaper every day. Does it need to be every day? Or can we do twice a week and then go in depth? I think the Correspondent is exactly doing that. Without having the burden of advertising. I call it burden because it can also be a privilege, of course, to have the money from advertising, but it also makes you into a commercial medium that has to provide on and on and on.
Okay, so we had design, we had journalism, and now we have time. Angelique, thank you very much for showing us these works.